The SS had a number for what a person was worth, about 1,630 Reichsmarks, written off over a working life expectancy of 9 months. A human being logged like a machine you expect to wear out. So you'd assume the people who kept books that cold ran the most efficient operation in history. But follow that number through the ledgers, and you find something the ruthless Nazi machine myth can't survive. The most carefully documented genocide ever committed was, by its own accounting, a failure. And they kept the books anyway. Start with that figure, because it's real and it's worse than it sounds. Inside the SS Economic and Administrative Main Office, the bureaucracy that actually ran the camps, there were clerks who kept valuation tables, and those tables did exactly what the title of this video promises. An average inmate was assigned a worth of roughly 1,630 Reichsmarks, not as a person, as an asset. The figure came from a chillingly simple calculation. Take what the prisoner produced over an expected working life of 9 months or less, then add the proceeds from everything stripped off the body afterward, right down to the bones and ashes, minus the cost of cremation. The death wasn't a tragedy in this ledger, it was a depreciation schedule. The figure survives in the work of Eugen Kogon, an Austrian survivor who documented the camp system from the inside, and it was corroborated years later in the Nuremberg trial of the SS economic chiefs. So yes, the clique was honest. There really was a balance sheet for genocide, a place where someone sat down and itemized a human life like inventory wearing out on a factory floor. But here's the thing the cold numbers can't hide. The deeper you read those books, the more they betray the very myth they seem to prove. We've all absorbed the image of the ruthlessly efficient Nazi machine, the regime that turned murder into a perfectly optimized industry. The ledgers tell a different story. By its own accounting, this system was a failure. Wasteful, corrupt, and constantly destroying the assets it so carefully tabulated. And they kept the books anyway. Before we touch a single invoice, you need to understand what the word labour actually meant here, because it didn't mean what you think. The Nazis had a term for it, extermination through labour. And it was not a metaphor, it was a method. Picture the daily ration. By the standards of the camp system, an inmate doing heavy manual work received somewhere around 1,300 calories a day. And as the war ground on, that number fell, dropping towards 700 calories by 1944. A body doing hard physical labour needs roughly double that just to hold steady. The math wasn't an accident or a supply failure, it was the design. Feed a person half of what they burn, work them 11 hours a day, and you have built a machine that kills slowly and predictably, on a timeline you can almost schedule. The job was the execution, the work was the weapon. That's why this matters before any of the pricing comes up. Every figure you're about to hear, every rate, every line item, every total, is a number attached to a death. Keep that anchored, because it makes what follows harder to look at, not easier. And if you'd rather have the parts of the war the textbooks skip straight past than the cleaned up version, subscribe to History Hangover so the next one finds you, because once you see the labour for what it was, the price list lands very differently. The cold ledger arrives and it's almost mundane, which is the point. The chemical giant IG Farben didn't buy slaves outright, it rented them. The arrangement with the SS was a flat daily rate, about 3 Reichsmarks a day for an unskilled prisoner, 4 for a skilled one, in exchange for shifts that ran 9 to 11 hours. It was a rental agreement, the kind of paperwork you'd file for heavy equipment. At Auschwitz III, the satellite camp at Monowitz, built to serve Farben's factories. The scale of it comes into focus. Across 1943 and 1944, roughly 35,000 prisoners worked for the company. Around 23,000 of them died. Do that division, and you reach a number that should not be possible to write calmly, about 32 deaths a day. The historian Peter Hayes described the men there as reduced to walking skeletons within months, worked until the body simply stopped, then replaced. Here's the rigged part. The companies renting these workers treated that death rate as the SS's problem, not their own. The dying didn't appear as a cost on Farben's books, because a fresh prisoner always arrived to replace the one who collapsed. There was no incentive to keep anyone alive longer. A worn-out labourer was simply swapped for the next transport, the way you'd replace a broken tool, and the swap cost the company nothing extra. The market was deliberately structured so that working a human being to death cost the buyer almost nothing. That's not efficiency, that's a system designed to make atrocity look cheap on paper. So who built that market, and where was all this money supposed to go? Pull back from the invoices and you find a man named Oswald Pohl, a former Navy paymaster, an accountant by temperament, who ran the SS Economic and Administrative Main Office. Pohl's ambition was to turn the SS into something it had never been, a corporation. Under his direction, the SS sprawled into a holding company that controlled quarries, brickworks, farms, construction firms, and munitions plants. On top of that sat a second business entirely, the sorting, valuing, and resale of everything stolen from the people being murdered. Heinrich Himmler's dream behind all of it was a financially self-sufficient SS, an organisation that could fund its own empire without leaning on the German state, which means the camps were never meant to be a cost the regime absorbed. They were meant to be a profit engine, factories where the raw material was human beings and the output was money for the order that ran them. So if that was the plan, the obvious question is the one the books are supposed to answer. Where did all that money actually end up? The answer begins with a document so methodical it reads like a corporate procedures manual, except for what it's describing. In September 1942, an SS officer named August Frank issued written instructions for handling the belongings of murdered families. It is one of the most disturbing pieces of paper in modern history, precisely because there is nothing dramatic about it. It's just a list. Cash was sorted. Foreign currency was set aside. Gold teeth were pulled and forwarded as precious metal. Eyeglasses were broken down. The gold frames sent on as bullion. The lenses kept for reuse. Baby carriages, bedding, watches, clothing, all of it catalogued, graded and shipped onward. Yellow stars were unpicked from coats and dresses before the garments were handed to ethnic German settlers, erasing the evidence of where they came from. Hair shaved from victims, including the dead, was baled and sent to factories to be turned into felt and thread. The horror is the completeness. Nothing was treated as waste because the entire system was built to convert a person entirely into usable inputs. And the accounting reached even the killing itself. Among the Nuremberg trial documents is a single invoice from a camp billing 127 Reichsmarks and 5 pfennigs for the execution and cremation of 20 prisoners. The literal, itemised cost of a death, calculated to the pfennig and filed like a utility bill. If the paperwork was that precise, the reality on the ground was the opposite. A flood of plunder so vast it couldn't be controlled. The clearest picture comes from Franz Stangl, the commandant of Treblinka, who described the place years later in long post-war interviews with the journalist Gita Serini. When he first arrived, Stangl recalled, he stepped directly into money. Banknotes, jewels and clothing lay scattered across the camp square, trodden underfoot more than anyone could gather. Inside the sorting depots, the scale turned industrial. Long tables ran the length of the buildings, prisoners working down them under SS guard, separating the wealth of the dead into categories. One account from Treblinka remembered the piles rising under handwritten signs. Cotton here, silk there, wool, rags. Every fibre of human life organised into stock, everything sorted except the people themselves, who were already gone. And that raises the obvious problem with a system swimming in this much loot. When wealth is literally piling up faster than you can count it, when it's lying in the dirt of the camp square, how on earth could anyone keep track of where it all went? They couldn't. And this is where the efficiency myth finally cracks open. Odilo Globoknik, the SS officer overseeing the murder of Polish Jewry in Operation Reinhard, proudly reported that the operation had produced more than 178 million Reichsmarks in seized assets. He boasted about the orderliness of his bookkeeping. Then, almost in the same breath, he conceded the truth, that the accounts had no firm basis and rested entirely on the personal honesty of the SS men handling the money. Think about what that admission means. The man in charge was telling his superiors that his ledgers were essentially a matter of trust among thieves, and the thieves were stealing. At the same time, Globoknik was filing his proud totals. An SS judge named Konrad Morgan was busy prosecuting hundreds of SS personnel for robbing the depots, pocketing gold, diamonds, and cash that was supposed to flow upward to the Reich. Later, the Nuremberg trial of Pohl and his deputies exposed SS firms cooking their own books to hide profits from the very state they claimed to serve. So picture the actual machine. A regime that priced human beings to the pfennig couldn't measure its own corruption. The bookkeeping was a performance, and underneath it, the whole enterprise was rotten with theft it had no way to count. Here's the reveal the title sets up, and then inverts. Strip away the boasting and the valuation tables, and historians cannot confirm that the camp economy ever net helped the German war effort. The thing that's supposed to make slavery rational, cheap labour producing real value, doesn't hold up under examination. The actual force driving Germany toward forced labour wasn't the lure of a bargain. It was desperation. The country was hemorrhaging working-age men into the army, and by 1944, foreign workers and prisoners of war made up around a fifth of the entire German workforce. That was a manpower crisis, not a profit strategy. And the output from starving, dying labourers was predictably dismal. Low productivity from people too weak to work well, against the enormous backstage costs of transporting, guarding, housing, and disposing of millions. Every prisoner had to be moved by rail, counted, fenced, fed even at starvation levels, and watched by guards who could otherwise have been at the front. The trains alone tied up locomotives, and track a country at war could barely spare. Add it all up, and the system drained far more than its scale suggests it should have returned, which leaves the contradiction at the heart of everything. If the slave economy was barely paying off, if it might have been losing money outright, then why did the men running it keep destroying their own workforce? Why kill the very assets you spent years pricing and renting out? That contradiction has a name and a date. Over the course of roughly 2 days, in an operation the SS codenamed Harvest Festival, gunmen shot around 42,000 Jewish forced labourers across a cluster of camps in occupied Poland. 42,000 people, killed in less time than it takes to fill out a quarterly report. Sit with what that meant in the regime's own terms. These were not prisoners who had outlived their usefulness in some accounting sense. They were the workforce, the precise assets the SS had spent years valuing, renting, tabulating, and bragging about. And the order came down to liquidate them overnight anyway. It is the clearest possible proof of the rule that governed the entire system. Whenever ideology and economics collided, ideology won. Every single time, the balance sheet was never actually in charge. The killing was the goal, and the money was a byproduct the regime would sacrifice the moment its racial obsessions demanded it. Which means the entire premise of this video, the idea that the camps were, at bottom, a business, was the lie the books themselves were built to maintain. So what were all those ledgers really for? Not profit. The meticulous accounting was never evidence that the camps made economic sense. It was a costume, a layer of bureaucratic routine draped over mass murder, so that paymasters and executives and clerks could file genocide as ordinary paperwork. Its function was psychological and institutional, not financial. The forms let a man tabulate the proceeds from a dead child's clothing and tell himself he was simply doing his job. The numbers turned an atrocity into a desk task. That was the point of keeping them, and the thread runs forward into our own time. IG Farben, the company that rented human beings by the day, was broken up after the war. Its successor firms eventually drawn into decades of pressure over what they had done. Restitution programs were created that formally acknowledged something the perpetrators tried to bury: that the victims had been economically exploited, their labour and their belongings stolen as part of the crime. Even the gold looted from the dead, melted and passed through the Reichsbank, left a stain that shaped how nations later traced where stolen wealth had gone. So here's the line that recontextualises the whole title. The disturbing question was never whether running a death camp turned a profit. By its own books, it mostly didn't. And when profit and murder ever conflicted, murder won. The truly chilling thing is simpler, and it has nothing to do with the bottom line. It's that they kept books at all. Thanks for watching History Hangover. If this is your kind of thing, we've got plenty of other deep dives into the hidden machinery and the buried aftermath of the Second World War. So like the video, subscribe, and hit the bell so the next one finds you. We'll see you in the next one.